Los Angeles International Airport, 9 p.m. The loudspeaker echoed steadily over the flow of passengers crowding around the baggage carousel, the mechanical heartbeat of a city that never slept. Isabella Reed stood wedged among them, gripping the worn handle of her carry-on dark circles under her eyes from 2 sleepless nights. She had just returned from a failed interview in Chicago. The country's biggest magazine had rejected her investigative report. Not marketable, lacking appeal, people don't care about local politics anymore. Those words looped in her mind like a scratched vinyl record stuck on repeat. Isabella sighed, covering her mouth as a yawn overtook her. The crowd around the carousel thinned. Suitcases kept sliding out black identical, as if made to erase all sense of direction. Hers was black too old, and tilted to the left because of a broken wheel. When her suitcase appeared, she spotted only one familiar thing, a half-peeled silver star sticker. Without thinking, she pulled it off the belt. The wheel rolled smoothly, too smoothly. She frowned it was supposed to drag left, but she dismissed it, whispering to herself. Maybe they fixed it at the airport. Outside, the rain began to fall. The first October rain tapped softly against the taxi window, mingling with the low hum of the engine and a faint old song on the radio. Isabella leaned back, watching the city drift backward through the glass. Los Angeles still glittered, as if fatigue were something it had never known. Her phone buzzed inside her coat pocket. A message from her landlord. 3 more days or I'm changing the locks. You can pick up your stuff, off the sidewalk. Isabella didn't reply. She switched off the screen, resting her head against the cold window. 3 days. 3 days to make money or to find a miracle. Her apartment sat on the 4th floor of an old building, peeling walls, an elevator broken for 2 years. She dragged the suitcase up the stairs, her breath mingling with the smell of rust and cigarette smoke. When the door closed behind her, silence fell, the weary silence of someone long accustomed to loneliness. A small room yellowed light sticky notes covering the walls. Her desk was piled with old drafts and a laptop with a broken hinge. A scrap of paper read, "Not everyone is born to be heard, but everyone has something to say." Her father had written that a Pulitzer-winning journalist who'd died in an accident 10 years ago. She'd kept the note as a charm, though sometimes it felt more like a curse than faith. Isabella dropped the suitcase, collapsed onto her rickety chair. She cracked open a can of warm beer, took a long drink, and stared at the suitcase. Something was off. The leather was new. The lock gleamed. No, impossible. She couldn't afford a new suitcase. A chill crawled up her spine. She unzipped it. Inside weren't her wrinkled clothes or painkillers. There were neatly folded shirts, an Armani suit, a Patek Philippe watch, a thin titanium laptop engraved with Sullivan Group, and a brown leather file. Isabella froze. Her heart thudded painfully. Inside the file, thick Swiss bank papers, strings of numbers, accounts transfers, recipient names. A photograph slipped out face down on the floor. She picked it up. A man in a black suit stood beside a sports car. His eyes were cold, his face dangerously handsome. On the back, written in blue ink, Henry Sullivan, confidential. A shiver raced through her. The name sounded familiar. She'd heard it somewhere. Henry Sullivan, heir to the Sullivan Group, one of the East Coast's largest financial empires, rumored for years to be tied to the Italian Mafia. A name no journalist dared print because everyone who had vanished from the industry. Isabella let out a trembling laugh. What a cruel joke from fate. A broke journalist now holding the evidence that could topple a criminal empire. She grabbed her phone, turned on the camera. Just a few photos, she told herself, for safety. But as the flash went off, a tiny red light flickered on the corner of the suitcase. She leaned closer. A small device no bigger than a fingertip blinked slowly. A signal light. A GPS tracker. Isabella shot to her feet. The air thickened. She pulled back the curtain. Below, on the empty street, 3 black cars sat parked side by side. Headlights on, engines running. Her pulse quickened. A man stepped out, perfect black suit, steady stride. Then 2, 5, 10. They moved together, synchronized, silent, precise. Isabella stumbled back, trembling. The window, the stairs, the door, every exit led toward them. A knock echoed. 3 firm, deliberate raps. She held her breath. Another knock louder this time. Then a voice deep smooth with the faint trace of an Italian accent that made her heart twist for reasons she didn't understand. Isabella Reed. I know you're in there. I'm not here to hurt you. I just want what's mine. No reply. Only the steady drumming of rain against the window. The voice again low and calm like steel dropped into water. You have two choices, Isabella. Open the door and talk to me, or let my men do it for you. She swallowed hard. No weapon, only a fruit knife, a broken laptop, and two shaking hands. Then the soft click of a turning lock. Her heart pounded as she backed into the wall. The door opened. Light spilled in from the hallway, framing the silhouette of a man in a black suit. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the ease of someone used to command. Dark hair slicked back. Cool gray eyes scanning the shabby room. Good evening, Miss Reed. I believe you have my suitcase. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. Who are you, Henry Sullivan? The name rolled off his tongue with calm certainty like a brand. His gaze landed on the open file, the photo of himself lying face up on the table. No anger, no threat, just a faint, unnerving smile. You looked inside. And you took pictures. Isabella froze. He stepped closer, slow and deliberate, until only half a meter separated them. His breath smelled of expensive cologne, and something else. Something sharp like gunpowder. I despise curiosity, he murmured. But I've always admired those who aren't afraid. And you, Isabella Reed, seem to be both. She backed up, spine hitting the wall. What are you going to do to me? Henry tilted his head, eyes never leaving hers, that he said softly, depends on how you choose to live. A flicker of amusement crossed his lips. Half irony, half intrigue. He lifted the file, flipping through the pages. Do you have any idea what curiosity costs? Isabella said nothing. Her eyes caught a faint scar along his jaw, a mark that spoke of violence survived. And for a brief second, instead of fear, she felt something else, a deep loneliness hiding behind his calm exterior. Henry closed the file, setting it down. I don't kill journalists, Miss Reed, but I can't let them ruin the game. He turned to the doorway, gesturing to a man outside. Bring up her suitcase. Isabella's eyes widened. You found mine? Without turning, Henry replied quietly. When a man wants to find someone, he doesn't need a miracle. Just a reason strong enough. The guard placed her battered suitcase on the floor. The left wheel rattled, clack-clack, familiar broken hers. I'll take what's mine, Henry said. And you will come with me. Where? He paused at the door, glancing back with a faint smile. Somewhere safer. At least, until I know whether you're a threat or salvation. The door closed, leaving behind the scent of rain and the suffocating silence of fate turning its page. Isabella stood frozen between two suitcases, one holding the wreckage of her old life, the other a secret that could erase her forever. And she knew from that moment on there was no turning back. If you were Isabella Reed, would you open the door for Henry Sullivan? Share your thoughts, because Part 2, The Door Opens to Darkness, will reveal the truth behind the man named Henry Sullivan. Isabella couldn't remember the exact moment she agreed to follow Henry Sullivan. Maybe it was when his eyes met hers, deep calm, and filled with something that made her forget how to breathe. Or maybe it was when she saw the cold glint of guns in the hallway, realizing that her only choice wasn't to go, or not to go, but how to go. The black car slid through the rain-soaked night of Los Angeles. The city shimmered with lights as if someone had spilled a cup of liquid gold across its map. Inside, Henry sat beside her in silence. The dashboard light brushed across his cheekbones, carving his face into planes of shadow and steel. Isabella stared out the window, her heart a chaotic mix of fear and reckless curiosity. She'd been here before, sitting in interview chairs, in messy newsrooms, in press conferences, where people called her the daughter of the legendary Mr. Reed. But she had never sat beside a man whose very breath made her heart want to escape its cage. Henry was the kind of man who made an entire room adjust its rhythm when he walked in. He didn't need to raise his voice or give commands. A single look was enough for people to know. He decided who lived in peace and who disappeared. Do you always take pictures of everything you touch? His voice was low, slightly husky, like aged whiskey. Isabella startled. Are you threatening me? Henry tilted his head, a faint curve at the corner of his lips. If I wanted to threaten you, I wouldn't have invited you to sit here. I don't recall being invited. You're still breathing, Miss Reed. To me, that's invitation enough. She said nothing. She didn't want to ask more, afraid the answers might be ones she wasn't ready to hear. The car turned onto a suburban road where the lights grew sparse. The rain had stopped, leaving only a heavy fog. Ahead, an iron gate slowly opened, revealing a cobblestone path leading to a mansion hidden among the trees. Warm yellow light glowed faintly from the second-floor windows, hazy dreamlike. Henry stepped out first and opened the door for her. Welcome to my home. She looked around an old European-style mansion of gray brick and black roof tiles, rows of red maple trees lining the drive. It was beautiful, but in a way that carried sorrow. Something in the air made her shiver, not from fear, but from the feeling of standing inside a place that was both sanctuary and trap. Inside, everything was arranged with deliberate perfection. Classic paintings, Italian marble statues, and the faint scent of cedarwood in the air. There was no trace of violence, though she knew the men outside were no ordinary bodyguards. A middle-aged man descended the staircase and bowed slightly. Sir, the guest room is ready. Henry nodded. Thank you, Marco. He turned to Isabella. You'll stay here. No one will hurt you as long as you don't try to help yourself. What do you mean, leaving? Calling? Sending messages? Or being too curious? He paused, his voice softening, almost like advice. I don't like hurting people. But I hate betrayal even more. She wanted to argue, to tell him she had nothing to betray, but his gaze trapped her words in her throat. So she simply nodded. Henry looked at her for a moment longer, then turned away. His footsteps echoed across the marble floor, steady receding, leaving behind the scent of cold cologne, and something vaguely hollow. Her room was on the second floor, its window facing a misty lake. On the desk sat a steaming cup of tea. Someone had prepared it, as if they had known she would come. Isabella sat down, her hands trembling. She opened her laptop. No internet, no signal. Everything was cut off. Only her and the darkness outside. In that silence last night, replayed like a film reel, the knocking at the door, Henry's eyes, the fateful suitcase. She thought of her father. He once said a true journalist doesn't just tell the truth. She takes responsibility for what follows it. And now the consequence of that truth sat in a Mafia mansion across from a man whose face held both sin and sorrow. Near midnight, the door creaked open. Henry stood there wearing a white shirt, a glass of liquor in hand. The hallway light glinted on the thin scar along his neck, long and fine like an old knife mark. You're still awake. It's not easy to sleep when a stranger drags you into the woods. He smiled faintly. I'm not a stranger. You know my name, you've seen my face, even photographed it. I'd say that makes us rather intimate already. Isabella met his eyes. You always talk like you're playing chess, don't you? Henry stepped in, sitting across from her. Because in my life, one wrong move means losing everything. He looked up. Who do you think I am, Miss Reed? She hesitated. Someone dangerous, but lonely. Henry froze, not in surprise, but as if her words had touched a place he'd buried deep. He chuckled softly, taking a sip of his drink. You're a journalist. Don't let your instincts hurt people. And you, I don't hurt. I just bleed. A long silence followed. Henry sat his glass down and stood. The light above stretched his shadow until it touched her feet. Get some sleep. Tomorrow will be long. If I try to run, will you kill me? He paused, tilting his head, eyes narrowing, half smile, half threat. No, but I'll make you want to come back. He left the door closing softly behind him, leaving the faint scent of whiskey and the feeling that her heart had just been caught by something unnamed. Morning came with sunlight spilling through the curtains. The room was still quiet except for a silver tray by the door, a complete breakfast, and a handwritten note. Don't be afraid. I just need to know if you were a mistake. HS. She picked it up, reading it over and over. His handwriting was sharp, strong slanting, right the kind of script written by a man who controlled everything, yet hadn't slept well in years. From the window she saw the back garden. Henry was there talking to another man. The light caught his dark hair and shimmered in the puddles around his feet. He wasn't smiling. He didn't give orders. He simply spoke, and the man nodded and left immediately. Isabella found herself wondering, how does a man like that live in a world made only of obedience and betrayal? And why of all people had he not killed her from the start? Her heart pounded not from fear this time, but from something far more dangerous curiosity. By noon, Henry invited her to the dining room. A long table draped in white linen red roses in a crystal vase. He sat at one end, she at the other, 10 empty chairs between them. For several minutes, neither spoke. Only the soft rhythm of cutlery against porcelain filled the air, like the beat of a familiar tune. Then Henry asked quietly, "Do you believe in fate?" "Numb, I believe in choices." He looked up, that gaze pinned her in place. "Strange, because it was my choice that led us here. You think I chose to take your suitcase?" "Nothing is accidental, Miss Reed. I believe in intentional chaos. You're saying you wanted me to take it." Henry didn't answer. He stood and walked to the window, staring out at the lake. Sunlight traced silver along his shoulders and hair. You know what's most fascinating about the truth? What people always think they find it, when in fact, it's the truth that finds those brave enough to touch it. She watched him, feeling a strange mix of fear and pity. In that light, Henry Sullivan no longer looked like the criminal whispered about in newsrooms. He looked like a man trapped between two worlds, half darkness, half light, both tearing at him. She didn't realize that through the reflection in the window, his eyes were studying her too. And in that gaze was something that didn't belong to power, but to a fragile trust being tested. That afternoon, she was allowed to walk in the garden. Marco, the loyal housekeeper, followed at a respectful distance. The air smelled of red maple leaves. In the distance, Henry spoke on the phone, voice low and steady. A sudden gust scattered the papers on a stone table. One sheet blew toward her feet. Isabella bent to pick it up. The bold letters at the top froze her in place. Operation Whitestone. Human cargo. She looked up just as Henry turned. Their eyes met. His no longer soft, but sharp as a blade. "Who gave you permission to touch that?" Isabella stepped back, voice trembling. I just picked it up." Henry moved closer, his anger tightly leashed. But when he stopped just one breath away, he looked into her eyes. "You have no idea what you're standing in the middle of, Isabella Reed." His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of a warning. A moment later, he took the paper from her hand, slid it back into the folder. Neither spoke again. The wind swept through the garden, carrying red maple leaves like drops of blood across the green grass. And for the first time, Isabella's fear transformed into something else. The belief that behind the door named Henry Sullivan lay a secret powerful enough to change the world. Rain fell hard against the window panes, reflecting the streetlights like shards of shattered glass. Isabella sat alone in the vast living room, before a small fire still burning in the hearth. The golden flames danced across the stone wall, flickering in silence. She could hear the steady ticking of the antique clock, the only sound in a mansion that perhaps had never truly known peace. From upstairs, Henry's voice carried down low, tense, stretched like a wire pulled too tight. He was on the phone, switching between English and Italian, sharp-clipped, commanding. She couldn't understand everything, but a few words stood out: shipment, Whitestone, betrayal. All the same words she'd seen printed on the document she wasn't supposed to touch. She set her teacup down, pulse quickening. At that moment, she realized what Henry was protecting wasn't just his life. It was a secret that could burn the world to the ground. Henry appeared a few minutes later. His shirt was damp, collar open, revealing the sharp line of his collarbone, his hair slightly disheveled from the rain. But his eyes were unchanged, those unreadable, cold gray eyes of a man who never showed weakness. Not even for a single breath. He stopped at the doorway, watching her in silence. "You shouldn't be sitting here alone. This is your house," she murmured steadily. "Where else am I supposed to sit?" Henry approached, poured himself a glass of whiskey. "What did you read in that paper? Just a few lines I didn't fully understand." "And what did you think?" She met his gaze. "That you're hiding something. Not just for power." He gave a brief, humorless smile, one that didn't reach his eyes. "You're half right. And the other half? Because I have nothing left to lose." He downed the drink in one motion, setting the glass down softly, yet the sound hit the air like a warning. Nothing left to lose, she repeated quietly, afraid to shatter the fragile stillness between them. Henry turned toward the fire, its light cut across his face, tracing the thin scar along his jaw. When I was 22, my younger brother died in a fire in Brooklyn. His tone was slow, measured, like reciting a memory buried alive. They called it an accident, but I knew better. It was a message, a warning from those who wanted Sullivan Group to kneel. Isabella said nothing. He continued, voice lower now, but steady, the kind of steadiness that comes from living through hell. Since that night, I learned one thing sometimes: to protect the ones you love, you have to become a monster in the world's eyes. The fire crackled softly. She saw it then beneath the armor and control the man who had walked through flames and kept living just to guard the last ember that hadn't died. She whispered, "And Whitestone. Is it connected to that?" Henry looked up, eyes storm gray. "You don't want to know, Isabella. Once you see it, there's no going back. You're afraid of me. I'm afraid you'll pay a price you were never meant to pay." The window suddenly rattled. A strange noise came from the garden. Henry turned instantly, body tightening in reflex. His eyes sharpened in a single heartbeat. He gestured for her to stay silent and pulled a gun from his side. His steps were soundless, a shadow moving through darkness. Isabella rose, her heart hammering. She heard voices outside, low, urgent, then the sharp crash of breaking glass. In seconds, the quiet mansion became a maze of chaos. Footsteps pounding, the metallic click of guns being cocked, and the acrid scent of gunpowder filling the air. Henry sprinted toward the door. She opened her mouth to call him, but before she could light, flared outside a blinding, deafening explosion. The blast knocked her to the floor, smoke and debris swirling in a violent storm. Shouts echoed from a distance, mixed with gunfire. Isabella crawled up, coughing, eyes stinging with tears and dust. Through the haze, she saw Henry push through the smoke, grab her, pull her tightly into his arms. "Come with me." He half carried her, running down the corridor. Behind them, a second explosion shattered the windows, shards of glass raining like silver. His breath came fast but steady, the rhythm of someone long accustomed to chaos. They plunged into the basement, where a hidden passage opened beneath the floor. In the dark, red emergency lights flickered. She saw blood running down his arm, but Henry didn't slow. "You're hurt." "It's nothing." His voice was sharp. "Stay quiet, Isabella. They're not here to warn me. They're here to finish it." She clutched his hand tightly, hearing footsteps pounding behind them, closer, closer. A bullet sliced through the air, grazing her hair before embedding in the wall. Henry turned, fired back. The tunnel roared with the echo. A man fell. Henry pulled her onward until they reached a faint glow ahead. The steel door burst open, leading out to the river behind the mansion. Cold wind whipped across their faces, carrying the smell of smoke and rain. A black motorboat waited by the dock. Henry lifted her aboard, then jumped in after. "Keep your head down!" The boat roared to life, cutting across the water. Behind them, the mansion blazed, a towering inferno, spilling its reflection over the dark river. Isabella turned back, breath-catching. "My God. Your house. No one died. I moved them out before the fire started." "You knew." Henry said nothing. The silence between them was heavy, filled with answers she didn't dare to trust. By dawn, they reached an abandoned dock a few miles from Brooklyn. Henry tied the boat, turning toward her. Morning light washed over his face, streaked with blood, soot, and sweat. Yet in his eyes something still glimmered, a thin thread of light not yet broken. Isabella stepped closer, trembling. "You saved me. Why?" Henry looked at her for a long moment, then spoke, voice low and raw. "Because I don't want to see another person die because of what I've done." The words fell heavy in the air like iron. She wanted to answer, but he had already turned away. All she could see was his silhouette against the rising sun, the lonely outline of a man who had just lost part of his world, but still had to keep walking. They found shelter in an old warehouse. The wind moaned through the tin roof, the smell of oil mixed with sea salt. Henry lit a small fire. Isabella wrapped herself in the thin blanket he handed her, shivering, as she watched him bandage his wound with a strip torn from his shirt. "Let me help." He shook his head. I'm used to it. Being strong isn't always the answer, Henry. He looked up, and the way he looked at her made her heart ache. You're strange, Isabella Reed. Everyone else fears me but you. You want to help. Maybe because I see what others can't. And what's that, the man who's trying to make things right? Henry froze, not out of disbelief, but because she'd spoken the one thing he'd never dared to believe himself. He laughed softly, but the sound was real this time. Make things right. I'm not sure there's any part of me left unbroken to fix. Then, start with the part that's still alive, she said gently. In that moment, amid smoke ashes and silence, fear dissolved into understanding. Isabella realized that Henry wasn't the monster from the headlines. He was a man standing in the gray between good and evil, and maybe no longer sure which side he belonged to. Outside, the sun rose higher, casting light on the ruins in the distance. Isabella stood by the door, watching the smoke still curling from where the mansion had been. Henry came up behind her. They said nothing. Then he murmured quietly, "From now on, they'll be hunting you too, not just me." She turned to him, her voice steady. "Then don't let them find me." A faint smile touched his lips, weary, but for the first time truly gentle. "You're not afraid. Of course I am. Just not of you anymore." Henry looked at her long enough for time to lose meaning. The dawn light glowed in their eyes, gold as ash, warm as fire. Brooklyn had burned that night, and from its flames, something new had begun to take shape, fragile as faith, fierce as survival. Isabella knew that from this moment on, their story was no longer about her and him. It was about two souls finding their way out of the dark together. The road stretched along the eastern shore, winding past silver grass fields, glimmering under the early autumn sun. Isabella leaned her head against the car window, watching the faint shimmer of waves in the distance. It had been 3 days since the fire in Brooklyn, 3 days without real sleep, without dreams, without knowing where she truly was on the world's map. Henry sat behind the wheel, driving with quiet ease, as if this were a weekend getaway, not a flight from death. His white shirt had been replaced by a light wool sweater sleeves casually rolled up, exposing tanned wrists, marked with half-healed cuts. The sea breeze blew into the car, ruffling a few strands of his dark hair, yet his eyes remained the same, calm, distant, impossible to read. Isabella watched him silently. She realized there were two Henry Sullivans. One was the man who commanded like fate itself. The other, the one driving through the night, was silent, steady, doing everything to make sure she could breathe in peace. "Where are you taking me?" she asked. Henry glanced at her through the rearview mirror. "Somewhere no one can find us." "Us" makes it sound more like partners in crime than victims. He smiled faintly. "After Brooklyn, we're both targets. Trust me, that's the most reasonable partnership we can have right now." She sighed, resting her head against the glass, watching his reflection ripple over the sea. Between them, the distance was no longer measured by words, but by how many times he stayed silent to protect her, and how many times she pretended not to see the wounds he tried to hide. By afternoon, they reached a small wooden house nestled on the sandy dunes of the Hamptons. It was modest, slanted-roofed, surrounded by rows of whispering pine. From afar, the rhythmic crash of waves blended with the soft breath of the sea. Henry got out first, opened the trunk, and grabbed their bags before turning to her. "From now on, your name is Clara Lewis. You're here to write a novel. No one must know who you really are. Understood?" She nodded. "And you, I'm the landlord who rents the house. What's your name in this little play?" Henry's lips curved slightly, a flicker of mischief in his eyes. "Luca Romano, Italian widower, likes silence and red wine." That sounds oddly accurate. Maybe because I chose a role that isn't too different from myself. Inside the house was small but warm. The scent of pinewood and sea air mingled gently in the space. She arranged a few things, setting her laptop by the window on a wooden desk. Henry stood on the porch, speaking quietly in Italian, over the phone, pausing at times, his gaze fixed on the horizon, as if weighing something heavier than life itself. Isabella realized that whenever he fell silent, the world around him seemed to stop as well. And she had begun to fear that silence, because there was something in it far more dangerous than Promise's gravity. When Henry came back inside, sunset followed him in. Golden light poured into the room, painting his face beautiful cold and strangely tender. Still planning to write, he asked. Not tonight. Why not? I don't know where to start. Maybe with the suitcase, or with the man hiding more secrets than he admits. Henry raised an eyebrow. Careful, Clara. They say writing is the quickest way to reveal what you fear most. She smiled faintly. And you, Henry, I mean Luca, what do you fear most? He hesitated just a second, as if she had touched something buried too deep. Trusting the wrong person. Again. She said nothing, not because she had no words, but because she suddenly understood. Among all the dangers in his world, the thing that scared him most was faith. Night fell. The ocean sighed beyond the window. The house filled with the soft whistle of wind through the cracks and the faint scent of smoke. Isabella couldn't sleep. She put on a coat and stepped outside. Henry was there, sitting on the porch, a half-burned cigarette glowing between his long fingers. The tiny flame illuminated his face in a fragile outline. She sat beside him wordless. After a long pause, he spoke. When I was a kid, I was afraid of the ocean. She turned. You, a man like you, afraid of the sea. He gave a small laugh, not the confident kind, but the kind that comes from remembering something that still hurts. My brother loved to swim. I didn't. That day the waves were strong. He called for me to jump in with him. I said no, and then he didn't come back. She watched him, his eyes lost in the horizon, where sea and sky met in a blur between life and death. Since then, I never trusted water again. Too deep, too dark, like people. He stubbed out the cigarette, then turned toward her. And you, Clara, what are you afraid of? She pressed her lips together. Losing myself the moment someone stops being terrifying. He didn't answer, just looked at her for a long time. The space between them was so small she could hear his breath slow deep, carrying traces of smoke and mint. His fingers brushed her hair lightly, then retreated like someone touching a memory he wasn't allowed to keep. Go to sleep, he said softly. Tomorrow I'll teach you how to make real Italian coffee. She smiled. I didn't think you were the coffee type, Henry. When there's someone to make it with, I am. He stood, walked inside, leaving her alone with the sea wind and a strange warmth she couldn't name. The next morning, the sound of waves and the scent of coffee woke her. Henry stood by the stove in a white shirt holding a mocha pot. The scene was so ordinary it felt unreal, as if he had never held a gun, never ordered anyone's death. He looked up, catching her gaze. I'm no chef, but coffee is one thing I can't get wrong. You know, she said softly, seeing you like this, I think you could have lived another life. Henry poured the coffee, setting the cup in front of her. No one escapes the past, Isabella. We just choose how to live with it. She lowered her voice. Have you ever wanted forgiveness? He smiled a small, broken smile that made her chest tighten. Men like me don't seek forgiveness. We just try not to make the same mistakes twice. That afternoon, Henry stepped out to make a call. Isabella stayed behind to tidy up. While cleaning a small drawer near the table, she found a thick, worn black leather notebook. Inside were pages written in dark blue ink, not business notes, but a journal. You once said, if one day I can't save the world, at least save one person. I saved her, Isabella. But will she be the one to save me? Her hands trembled. The handwriting was Henry's firm, slanted with a faint shake at the end of each line. She closed the book gently, heart pounding. Outside, an engine roared. Henry returned, his face tenser than usual. We have to go. Run again. No, move. Someone traced activity back to Brooklyn. What about this place? He glanced around, his eyes briefly softening. A house this beautiful shouldn't remember blood. Without thinking, she reached for his hand. Are you tired? Henry looked down at her small hand in his, and for a fleeting second, his eyes softened completely. He wasn't the ruler of shadows then, just a man trying not to shake. What if I am? We don't have another road, she whispered. There is one, the road for two people who refuse to give up. Henry gave a low laugh. Sounds like a line from a novel. Maybe because it deserves to be written. He stared at her long and quiet. The late afternoon light streamed through the window, bathing their faces in gold. And in that little house by the Hamptons, while the world hunted outside Henry Sullivan, felt for the first time the urge to stop, just to hear her voice one more moment. A sea breeze drifted through carrying salt and the fading scent of coffee. For a while neither spoke, but the silence between them was no longer defense. It was the only thing they could safely share when every word could become goodbye. Outside, the ocean remained mercilessly blue, but inside that small house between the smoke, the salt air, and the quiet ache of fear, two lost souls looked toward the same fragile thing, a fleeting peace they had never known before. Winter winds came early to the Hamptons that year. The rows of poplars outside the porch swayed their leaves, whispering secrets only the sea could understand. Isabella sat at the wooden table, a stack of documents Henry had just brought back lying before her. The lamp cast a pool of light across her face, delicate intent, her eyes reflecting something that was both fear and fascination. On the cover, the words Operation Whitestone appeared again, but this time it wasn't just a few scattered sheets. She saw maps, contracts, and satellite images. A network so vast it was terrifying, connecting private hospitals, research institutes, and humanitarian foundations. Henry sat across from her silent. He didn't speak, only watched her read as if observing an experiment whose outcome he already knew. At last, she looked up. "This isn't just money laundering," she whispered. "It's human trafficking." Her voice was hoarse, something caught in her throat. Henry nodded slowly. Not just people. Lives bought, tested, discarded under the name of humanitarian medicine. The air grew thick. She swallowed. "You were involved in this?" Henry leaned back, gaze drifting toward the misted window. "Once, not anymore. But they're still using your name, the Sullivan Group accounts." He cut her off, voice low-taut. "Because I let them. Once, to save a child's life." Isabella froze. He went on slowly, each word carving through memory like a knife. "My brother didn't die that night in Brooklyn. He lived 4 more months. The doctors said there was a way an experimental treatment illegal. I signed the papers. Paid with my soul. But miracles don't exist." He paused, fingertips brushing the scar along his jaw, a habit every time the past resurfaced. "They took that data, turned it into a trade, a trafficking ring disguised as salvation. I tried to cut ties, but it was too late. Whitestone became the monster I created." Isabella said nothing. She only saw his eyes, the eyes of a man who once believed he could command fate, only to be destroyed by it. She spoke softly. "So what will you do now?" Henry met her gaze. "Destroy it, even if it takes me with it." In that moment, she realized he wasn't speaking like a criminal. He was passing his own sentence. That night, Isabella couldn't sleep. She stepped onto the porch, where Henry sat, a cigarette glowing faintly between his fingers. "You can't fight the whole system alone," she said quietly. He exhaled smoke, a ghost in the cold air. "Do you believe that sometimes one spark is enough to bring down an empire?" "Yes, if it burns at the right time." He turned, eyes locking on hers. "Then I need your help." "Me," she stammered. "You used to be a journalist." "I need someone who'll look at the truth, not for money, not for power." She bit her lip. "You know I failed once because of a story. I'm not strong enough to fight your world." Henry's voice was low, steady, like waves rolling in the distance. "You don't have to be strong. Just honest. I'll handle the rest." The next morning, they sat in the kitchen, the smell of fresh coffee between them. Isabella opened her laptop while Henry pulled up a digital map. Red dots spread across the screen, like a web, each one a hospital or research facility tied to Whitestone. "This is their core," he said, pointing to the screen. "An underground facility outside New Jersey. If we get the main drive, the entire system collapses." She stared at him. "You said we—" Henry looked up, the morning light catching the gray-brown in his eyes. "Yes, because I can't leave you here alone anymore." She trembled slightly. She couldn't tell if it was fear or the weight of the word "you" when he said it. At noon, they walked along the shore. The wind was strong, the sky gray. Henry spoke little, only glancing back at times to make sure she was close. She stopped. Do you ever think about the future? He frowned. The future, I mean, after all of this. Henry gave a faint smile. I've never lived long enough to think about after. She looked down at her shoes sinking into the wet sand. That's a sad thing to say. It's true but unfair. He stopped turning toward her, and he stepped closer until only a few feet separated them. In my world, fairness is something you buy, not something you have. But if you're standing here now, then maybe there's still one thing I can't buy. His voice softened, almost a confession. And I don't want to lose it. The wind lifted strands of her hair. In her eyes, the sea reflected shades of gray and gold, just like him, warm and dangerous at once. Later that afternoon, she found Henry in the study. He was watching old footage surveillance videos from the Whitestone facility. The images were grainy, distorted, but clear enough children. Women being led into sterile white rooms. Isabella felt her stomach twist. She turned away, but Henry's voice stopped her. Don't look away. Why show me this? So you'll understand why there's no turning back. His tone was calm, terrifyingly so, but his eyes glistened with something unfallen like rain held back by pride. We can't fight out of pity, Isabella. Only truth makes people believe. She met his gaze. Are you using the truth to save the world, or yourself? He was silent for a moment, then said quietly, Maybe there's no difference. That evening, the rain began to fall. The wooden house glowed in the firelight. Isabella poured wine, handed him a glass. Aren't you afraid drinking too much will make you lose control? He took a sip, his eyes steady. Aren't you afraid of being near a dangerous man? She smiled faintly. I've already passed the stage of being afraid of you. He laughed genuinely this time. Careful, Isabella Reed. People usually regret saying that. She tilted her head, meeting his eyes. And you, Henry Sullivan, people usually regret not saying what they truly want. Silence stretched. Rain pattered softly on the roof. The fire threw their shadows onto the wall, so close they almost touched. Henry set his glass down, slowly stepped closer. He didn't touch her, just stood near enough for her to feel his breath warm and sharp with whiskey, and something that made her heart race. Some things he murmured should be thought not spoken. Why? Because saying them makes them real. And I'm not good enough to turn a wish into truth. Her voice softened. Maybe the best thing isn't trying to become someone else, but daring to believe you can still be forgiven. He squinted slightly, a mix of pain and amusement. You think someone like me deserves forgiveness? No, but I think everyone deserves a chance to change. Henry didn't answer. He just bowed his head, shoulders sinking in the firelight. And for the first time, Isabella saw him unguarded, not the man of power and shadow, but one learning painfully how to believe in light again. That night, when she returned to her room, he was still by the fire, staring into the flames. She paused in the doorway. If you burn your past, she asked softly, do you think the fire will reach your heart? He didn't look back. Probably, but I can live with that. And if someone wanted to keep some of that light alive in you? He let out a rough, broken laugh. Then I hope she's strong enough not to burn with me. She gazed at him for a moment, then quietly closed the door. He remained before the fire, its glow both friend and witness to his life. Outside, the sea murmured like a lullaby, and inside that small house between fire and shadow, two lost souls began to understand. Sometimes light doesn't come to erase the darkness, but to teach you how to walk beside it without losing yourself. That morning, the Hampton Sea was eerily still. No sound of waves, only a silence so heavy, Isabella could hear her own heartbeat. On the table, her coffee still steamed untouched, but Henry was gone. She stepped out onto the porch. The cold wind struck her face thick with salt. The black Jeep was no longer there. He had left no goodbye, no message, only the black leather notebook on the table open halfway. If I don't come back, don't look for me. But if you still want the truth, go to the place where I lost myself. Beneath it, a handwritten address, Newark, New Jersey. Isabella clutched the page, her pulse pounding. She knew Henry hadn't left to run away. He had gone back to the place where everything began, and perhaps where it would all end. The night before, she had seen him sitting by the window for hours, staring into the darkness, a glass of whiskey untouched in his hand. His gaze wasn't toward the future. It was toward the fracture of the past, the place where he had traded everything for the illusion that he could save a life. She had wanted to speak, but could only stand behind him in silence. And now, with dawn's light falling across the note he left behind, she understood. Some battles are unwinnable, yet people fight them anyway because once they owed someone a chance to live. She drove the remaining car through rows of old houses and fog-covered roads. The radio buzzed with news about the mysterious explosion in Brooklyn. Police suspected ties to the Sullivan Group. A male anchor's voice recited every word. Clearly, Chairman Henry Sullivan missing for 3 days, presumed dead in a retaliatory attack between rival factions. She switched it off. Her chest tightened. Not because she feared it was true, but because she refused to believe the world could reduce a man like Henry to a few cold lines in a report. She kept driving through the misty highway until the road sign appeared Newark, 5 miles. The wind howled through the cracks, carrying the metallic scent of smoke and rust. The old Whitestone Research Facility lay hidden among abandoned industrial buildings. The gate was rusted, the warning sign, half erased, authorized personnel only. She slipped inside. Light filtered through broken panels of corrugated steel, falling in strips across the damp concrete floor. Somewhere, water dripped rhythmically like a countdown. Then came the faint clang of metal. She turned Henry. He stood a few meters away, dressed in black gun holstered at his side. His face was paler, leaner, but his eyes still burned bright. The faint light caught the dried blood on his wrist. Isabella exhaled half relief, half anger. "You left without saying a word. Did you think I'd just sit and wait?" Henry didn't answer right away. He stepped closer, voice rough, weary, but resolute. "You shouldn't be here, Isabella. This isn't a place for people who still believe in goodness. But I believed in you. That's why I couldn't let you follow." She met his eyes. "You think you can carry this alone? Or are you afraid I'll see you're not the hero I imagined?" Henry froze. For a second, he wasn't the man who commanded others, but someone suddenly painfully seen. He gave a faint, hollow laugh. "No, Isabella. I'm afraid you'll choose to stay, even knowing there's no way out for me." Engines roared in the distance. Henry's expression sharpened. He pulled her behind a brick wall. "They're here. Who Whitestone's men? They know I'm trying to destroy the system." Tires crunched over gravel. Shadows appeared 3, then 4, then 6 men in black suits, guns drawn. Henry tightened his grip on the Glock. His voice was calm, measured. "Listen. When I signal, run through the back. Down the hall, turn right. There's an exit. Don't look back." She nodded, heart-racing eyes fixed on him. "What about you? I'll hold them off long enough for you to get out." "And then what?" He brushed her cheek just for a second, but enough to silence her. "Then I'll find you. If I still can." She wanted to believe him, but his eyes told another truth. Gunfire exploded. The walls shook, dust falling like rain. Henry shoved her forward, shouting, "Run!" Isabella sprinted down the corridor, breath-ragged heartbeat crashing in her chest. Behind her, gunshots echoed relentless. She didn't know who was hit, who fired, only that each blast tore a piece of him away from her. She ran until a hoarse groan stopped her cold. Part of her wanted to keep going, but her heart betrayed her reason. She turned back. Henry was down, blood blooming across his shoulder. 2 men closed in, guns raised. She didn't think she moved. Her eyes caught a rusted metal rod by the wall. She grabbed it, swung. A hiss of air, a crack, 1 man fell. The other turned, gun aimed. Henry rose, despite the pain, pulled the trigger. The shot echoed. The second man dropped. The air thickened with smoke and blood. Isabella trembled, gasping, the rod still quivering in her grip. Henry looked at her, half shocked, half proud. "You're insane," he rasped. "Did you really think I'd let you die here?" He laughed, wincing through the pain. "You should have been a war correspondent, not a psychologist." "And you," she shot back, voice shaking but firm, "should have learned how to trust people." They escaped through the back, down a narrow alley leading to an abandoned shipyard. Rain started to fall, heavy cold mixing with blood and smoke. Henry staggered, blood spreading down his arm. Isabella wrapped his arm around her shoulder, guiding him behind a stack of shipping crates. Let me see the wound. He shook his head, breath sharp. It's not deep. I can walk. You're lying, and you're stubborn. A weary smile flickered through the haze. She tore her coat, pressed the fabric to his wound hands, trembling. Henry watched her eyes softening. You know, he murmured, I thought I'd lost the ability to trust anyone. But you make me not want to be right. She froze, looking up. Raindrops slid from her hair down his neck, mingling with blood and warmth. The distance between them vanished, and in the wet, smoky air, they found no need for reasons. Henry lifted a hand, touched her cheek, warm, uncertain. She didn't pull away. Her eyes fluttered closed. The kiss came gently, a promise made of salt and iron. The world around them was chaos, but for that heartbeat between gunfire and rain, they forgot the hunt, the danger, the pain. There were only 2 souls lost found again between 2 bullets. When the sound of police sirens echoed in the distance, Henry pulled away, eyes steady once more. We have to move. They'll call for reinforcements. Isabella nodded, helping him to his feet. As they made their way toward the docks, she asked softly, If we survive this, what will you do? He was silent for a few seconds before answering. Maybe learn how to live a normal life. Make coffee in the morning. And stop watching people die because of me. She smiled faintly. Sounds like a luxury dream. Maybe, but you once told me sometimes the smallest faith is enough to keep someone walking. The wind picked up. Across the bay, the faint lights of a ship glowed against the fog, distant, unreal, like a dream. Isabella looked at him, her eyes filled with sorrow and calm. She knew there would be no miracles waiting ahead. But she also knew that from this moment, even if the sky still bled, they would walk the same path. On one side, darkness hunting them. On the other, a fragile spark of hope. And between the 2 bullets in the freezing winter rain, their love began to exist not for safety, but because nothing terrified them more than losing each other. A week after the explosion in Newark, the New York sky was heavy and gray as lead. News spread everywhere Whitestone Group was officially under investigation. Dozens of bank accounts were frozen. High-ranking officials disappeared. And one name dominated every headline: Henry Sullivan, the alleged mastermind, declared dead after committing suicide to evade justice. Isabella stood in the middle of the square watching the giant LED screen replay the broadcast. The winter wind tore through, snatching the newspaper from her hands. Henry's photograph, that cold, expressionless face, those unreadable eyes, flashed across every screen in the city. She closed her eyes, not to cry but to remember. To remember that last look before he disappeared into the smoke and gunfire. The final time she saw him, he had smiled faintly, knowingly, as if he had already accepted everything that would come. 7 days earlier. The rain in Newark fell like knives, sharp, cold, relentless. Henry and Isabella hid inside an abandoned freight car, rusted and silent. He sat slumped against the wooden wall, shoulder-bound with a strip torn from her coat. The wound still bled, but he never complained. Isabella sat across from him, eyes fixed on his face. You've lost too much blood. We need a hospital. We can't. His voice was weak but calm. Whitestone's DNA network is still active. The moment I enter a hospital, they'll find me. So you're just going to sit here and die. He smiled faintly, his gaze steady. Better to die for something true than live inside a lie. Her hands clenched around his. You said you wanted a normal life. What about that? Henry looked at her, the gray in his eyes catching the yellow glow through the cracks of the freight car. That's still true, but sometimes to have a normal life, you have to die first, at least in the eyes of the world. Isabella froze. What are you planning to do? He didn't answer. Instead, he opened the worn leather bag beside him and pulled out a small hard drive. Everything, every record from Whitestone is in here. The evidence I once helped bury. He placed it in her palm, his blood-stained fingers brushing her skin. Keep it. If I disappear, you'll know what to do. She shook her head, tears falling freely. No, you're not disappearing. We'll expose it together. Henry sighed, a tired, broken smile on his lips. There's no we in this part, Isabella. Her voice cracked, anger and heartbreak tangled together. You talk about redemption, about truth and justice, but you never let me walk beside you. What are you so afraid of? Me or yourself? Henry looked up, meeting her gaze sharp, sorrowful, unbearably gentle. Both. Silence. The rain grew harsher wind howling through the cracks like an omen. He reached out his cold hand, cupping her cheek. You're the only reason I still feel human. And that's exactly why I can't drag you down with me. Don't talk like you're saying goodbye. No, Isabella. This isn't goodbye. It's just a lie, one that might keep you alive. The next morning when she woke, he was gone. Only his coat remained, and a scrap of paper on the floor written in haste. If you're reading this, I've already left. Don't look for me. Some people must die for the truth to live. She collapsed, clutching his coat, still smelling faintly of smoke and cologne. And for the first time, her tears weren't born of fear, but of love for a man who chose sacrifice over happiness. Now, amid the rush of Manhattan, Isabella stood in the present again. She knew Henry wasn't dead, not really. Or at least not in the way the world claimed. A man like him, if he chose to vanish, the world wasn't dark enough to hold him. She still had the hard drive. Inside were all the records of Whitestone, the inhumane experiments, the lists of victims sold as data, and the names of financiers, doctors, and politicians who funded it all. It wasn't just evidence. It was the truth Henry had traded his life to set free. She submitted it anonymously to an independent investigative organization. Days later, the media exploded. But instead of triumph, Isabella felt only emptiness. Every headline was another knife because the more the world vilified Henry Sullivan, the criminal, the further it strayed from the man she had seen in the rain. The one who had whispered, "I don't want to be right anymore." That night, she returned to her old apartment in New Jersey. Once a refuge of fear, now only silence. She opened the door, switched on the light, and froze. There was an envelope on the table. No one but Henry could have left it there unseen. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a photo taken at the harbor during their time in the Hamptons. Her hair blown by the wind, and Henry beside her looking at her with an expression too gentle to belong to a man the world called a monster. On the back, a message written in his hand. The truth belongs to you. I belong to the dark. But don't let it swallow you, Isabella. She traced the ink with her fingertips, afraid to smudge it. It was his handwriting, strong, deliberate but trembling at the end like a thin, frayed thread. She didn't know where he was. Maybe Italy, where he was born. Maybe hiding in some nameless city, living under a new name, a man who had already died once. But she knew one thing for certain: he was still watching. Because only someone like Henry could disappear and still make the world remember him, not as a criminal, but as a man who dared to set truth on fire with his own life. One morning, as pale sunlight spilled through her window, Isabella opened her laptop. A new email had appeared. No subject, no sender, only one attachment: audio 1129 MP3. She pressed play. A voice filled the room, low, rough, and warm enough to stop time itself. If you're hearing this, it means I'm still alive. Don't ask where. Some places are safer left in silence. I just wanted to say, thank you for believing in a man who didn't deserve it. Live well, Isabella, because as long as you live, the human part of me does too. The sound of waves faded in at the end, his breath mingling with the sea, and then it was gone. She pressed her hand to the screen, tears falling not from loss, but from the quiet certainty that he was still somewhere under the same sky. A month later, an anonymous article appeared in the New York Chronicle, the lives saved by the Whitestone Project, and the man behind them. No one knew the author's name, but the final line silenced everyone who read it. In the dark, sometimes a man must pretend to be a monster just to keep what's human alive. Isabella knew only one man could have written that. She folded the paper, the afternoon light glinting off her half-empty coffee cup, and smiled softly. Henry Sullivan might have left this world at least as a man the law could name. But in every breath, in every gust of wind that swept through the city, she could still feel him. Not as a ghost, but as a whisper that lingered. Truth only matters if someone still believes in it. New Year's Eve. The streets pulsed with people. Fireworks painted the sky in gold and silver. Amid the crowd, Isabella walked alone, a small recorder tucked in her coat pocket. She played it whenever the city grew too loud or her heart too empty. The fireworks burst, reflecting across her face, and for a moment she saw him. Not a hallucination, not a dream, but clear as day across the street, Henry stood, black coat hands in pockets, smiling at her. She didn't run. She didn't call his name. She only nodded the same way they had once said goodbye in the rain at the Hamptons. Among thousands of strangers, he turned and disappeared, his figure swallowed by light and motion. But she knew as long as she believed he would exist, somewhere between shadow and light, because there are loves that don't need to be held, they only need to be remembered to live forever. Spring returned to New York. Along rain-dampened boulevards, mist rose like silk, wrapping softly around the budding trees. The city seemed to breathe again after months of exhaustion, as if everyone was relearning how to begin. Including Isabella Reed. She was no longer a journalist, no longer the woman from the Whitestone investigation that the media once obsessed over. Now she lived in a small apartment near Central Park, teaching creative writing to young students in the mornings and working on her book at night. Her new novel was called The Man Who Vanished Twice. It told the story of a man with sins to his name who chose to disappear to protect the truth. No one knew it was based on a real story. Only she did, and the man who had lived on the fragile border between darkness and redemption. That afternoon, as she was editing her manuscript, the doorbell rang. A package sat on the doorstep. No return address, just the words, "To Ms. Reed." She opened it. Inside was a small wooden box, simple, unpolished. When she lifted the lid, the scent of sandalwood spread through the air. Inside lay a silver key engraved with the words, "For what was left unsaid." No address, no message, just the key. But Isabella knew only one person had ever spoken to her in that language. She held it up. Light from the window struck the metal, shimmering like an unspoken promise. Beneath the box, a thin sheet of paper, a hand-drawn map, led to Venice, Italy. Venice in spring was veiled in mist. The scent of sea salt mingled with coffee, and the sound of oars echoed softly through narrow canals. Isabella stepped off the train at Santa Lucia, a small suitcase rolling behind her. She didn't ask anyone for directions, didn't tell anyone she was coming. Everything felt pre-written, a scene in a play she'd already been cast in. The hotel was tucked deep inside the old quarter red and yellow walls, aged by time moss, clinging to window frames. The receptionist simply said, "Room 204. The person who booked it asked me to tell you that." When she opened the door, a faint scent of cologne drifted out, wood and tobacco. On the desk sat a leather notebook beside it, a cup of espresso still warm. On the first page, in his unmistakable handwriting, "If you've made it here, it means I was right. The truth doesn't end when people fall silent. It simply changes form." His voice echoed in her head, deep, steady, edged with irony, yet tender in its warmth. She sat down and turned the pages. Inside were handwritten confessions, not a journal, but a reckoning. Henry had written about his early years in the Sullivan Group, about the contracts he'd signed without reading about the moment he realized Whitestone wasn't saving lives, it was buying them. Each line was a cut that bled. And yet, between the pain, Isabella found what she had always believed in his humanity. "I once thought justice could be measured by power. Now I know justice exists only when we accept losing everything we once owned." She smiled faintly as tears fell soaking the corner of the page, blurring the last line. "And if you've read this far, believe me, I never truly left." Rain fell over Venice. Isabella walked across the Rialto Bridge, umbrella in hand, as the city lights shimmered on the water like shattered constellations. She stopped when a street violinist began playing Nessun Dorma. The melody soared, melancholic, pure, endless. She looked up instinctively. On the rooftop across the canal, a man in a black coat leaned against the railing. The distance was great, but the silhouette was unmistakable. Dark hair, tall frame. The lamplight brushed against a familiar profile, Henry. Her mind doubted, but her heart recognized him before reason could catch up. He didn't look down. He turned and walked inside as if he hadn't seen her. Isabella dropped her umbrella and ran across the bridge, rain splashing against her dress. People turning to stare. When she reached the building, the stairwell to the rooftop was open. She climbed, breath and heartbeat tangled. The rooftop door swung open. Only the wind remained sweeping across the water below. He was gone. Only a small note lay on the railing, half blurred by rain. "Some meetings exist only to remind us that we once found each other, and that in itself is enough." She knelt, clutching the wet paper. This time she didn't cry, because she knew he was alive, and he had chosen to live this way between being seen and being untouchable. Months later, Isabella left Venice carrying the leather notebook and the silver key. She returned to America no longer the woman who once ran from the world. She founded a small organization called the Reed Foundation, helping victims once trapped in Whitestone's web find education and new lives. When asked why she simply smiled, "I'm just continuing a story someone else began." On her office wall hung a white canvas with a single line written faintly like a whisper. Justice is not punishment. It is choosing to stand with the light even once. One late afternoon sunlight spilled through her window as another package arrived. Inside was a photo, an aerial shot of Venice. Golden sky, glittering canals, and a single man standing on a bridge facing away from the camera. On the back, a single line read, "Light doesn't always shine on the most deserving, but on those who still believe it exists." No name, no need. She placed the photo on her desk beside her cup of black coffee and whispered, "I still believe Henry." 5 years later, a summer morning. Isabella sat on a bench in Central Park near the Bethesda fountain. Children ran around laughing, birds sang above. A man sat across from her and handed her a folded newspaper. She looked up startled. Not Henry, but his gaze was hauntingly familiar. The man smiled, his accent a blend of Italian and English, soft as mist. He said, "If you still come here every morning, I should give you this." She unfolded the paper. In a corner column was a small report, an explosion in southern Italy. A hidden facility once owned by Whitestone had been completely destroyed. No survivors. But at the site, investigators found an old metal plate engraved with the words, "The truth never dies." She folded the paper, looked up, but the man was gone. Only the wind remained, carrying the scent of jasmine and children's laughter. That night, she returned to her apartment and opened the window to the city lights. The gold reflections trembled across the glass. On the table, the silver key still lay where she'd left it, glinting like a star she'd never stopped remembering. She picked it up, held it tightly, and whispered, "You might be somewhere far away, but in this small shard of light, you still exist." A breeze swept through, turning a page in the old notebook he'd left behind. On the last page, written in blue ink, "If there's another life, I want to be the one who makes your morning coffee." Isabella smiled through her tears. Outside, dawn began to rise, washing the sky in pink. She placed the page back, whispering to a soul that might still be listening, "Then I'll wake early every day, just to wait for you." Light poured through the window, spilling over the notebook, the silver key, and the old photograph. Her shadow stretched long across the wall, merging with the newborn sunlight. Somewhere, perhaps in the mist of Venice or across the sea, Henry Sullivan was still alive in memory, in truth, and in the kind of love no one could ever end. And in that light, Isabella closed her eyes and smiled, as if they had finally found a place that needed no name, only each other. 12 years had passed since the world learned the name Whitestone and forgot the name Henry Sullivan. Isabella Reed was now 46. Her hair had grown longer, streaked with silver, yet her eyes were still as clear as that morning in the Hamptons, when she had once believed that light could redeem a man. She lived in Tuscany, Italy, a small house nestled in the vineyards surrounded by rolling green hills that stretched to the horizon. In the mornings, she brewed coffee. At noon, she wrote a few lines of her unfinished manuscript. In the afternoons, she walked along the gravel road to the village school where she taught literature to children who couldn't afford the city. Everyone thought Isabella had come to Italy to begin anew. Only she knew she had come to fulfill a promise that had never been spoken aloud. One April afternoon, when the lavender fields were just beginning to bloom, the postman brought a package. No sender's name, only a Venetian postmark. She opened it. Inside was an old silver pocket watch, engraved with the image of a small angel holding a torch. When she flipped it open, there were no hands, only a small photograph. 2 hands intertwined, taken from behind. Etched along the rim were the words, "Time stops only when the heart knows where it belongs." Isabella froze. Her breath caught. No signature. But she knew only Henry could have sent something like this. That evening, she went out to the garden and sat by the old olive tree. The air was still, yet the leaves trembled faintly. She spoke softly, as if someone were sitting beside her. "Still stubborn, aren't you, Henry? After all these years, you still send signs instead of coming back." The wind brushed her cheek, a touch so gentle it felt almost human. She smiled sadly. "You know, I once thought I'd forgotten. But every morning when I smell coffee in the kitchen, I still remember how you stirred it with your left hand." Her voice grew quiet, more like she was telling a story to herself. "I teach the children here about courage. One of them asked me, 'What were you most afraid of?' I said, 'Of having to keep living without believing in kindness.' They laughed, said it sounded like something an old woman would say." She looked up at the horizon, where the sunset spread gold across the hills. "But you know, some fears never leave. And strangely enough, you're the reason I'm not afraid anymore." A week later, the school where she taught held its 50th anniversary celebration. The hall was filled with warm yellow lights and soft jazz music. Children ran around laughing, their joy echoing through the small space. Isabella sat in the back row, watching them dance, her heart unshakably calm. Then the door opened quietly. A man stepped in tall silver at the temples, dressed simply in a dark suit. He wore a hat, moved slowly, but every gesture carried a quiet confidence that drew the air toward him. Isabella turned her gaze, passing over him, and stopped. For one instant, her heart forgot to beat. There was no mistaking it. No matter how much time had changed, one thing never could: those eyes. "Henry." He stood at the door, looking at her, saying nothing. But between them, 1,000 unsaid words filled the room all at once. After the ceremony, she went to the garden behind the school. The moon hung low, casting silver light across the grass. Henry stood there under a tree, hands in his pockets, silent as she approached. No need for greetings. They simply stood face to face, letting the silence speak for the years. She was the first to break it. You're still alive." Henry smiled, his voice low and warm, though rougher than she remembered. "There was a time I wasn't sure I was human anymore." She looked at him for a long moment, her voice barely above a whisper. "You disappeared for 12 years. Every time I saw the ocean, I swore I could hear your voice." Henry stepped closer until only a breath separated them. "I had to finish what I started. Whitestone wasn't truly gone. There were still people being used. I needed to end it completely." She swallowed hard. "And now?" He nodded slowly. "Now it's done. There's nothing left to keep me in the dark." She didn't realize she was crying until he lifted his hand and brushed away her tears. His hand was warm, real, but trembling. "You made a promise once," she whispered, voice breaking, "that if there was another life, you'd make coffee for me." Henry chuckled softly. "I remember. But if I'm still alive, maybe I should start in this one." She laughed through her tears. The sound mingled with the breeze light, unfinished, like a song that never needed an ending. The next morning, Henry stood in her small kitchen as if he had never left at all. He brewed coffee using the old mocha pot she'd kept for years. She stood in the doorway watching. His gestures were the same careful, precise, tilting the pot just so the coffee wouldn't spill. "Where have you been all this time?" "Everywhere. Paris, Naples, Kyoto. Wherever the darkness was, I went." And now, he looked up, the morning light glinting off the faint scar along his jaw. "Now I want to learn how to stay for the first time." She said nothing, only watched him, afraid that if she blinked, he might vanish again. He set the cup in front of her, the aroma filling the room. "You don't have to say anything, Isabella," he murmured. "Just let me sit here in the quiet beside you." The days that followed passed in a kind of peaceful disbelief. They tended the garden together, went to the village market, read quietly when it rained. Sometimes she caught him watching her, not like a man claiming possession, but like someone afraid she might fade if he looked away. One evening, as they sat on the porch, Henry said suddenly, "Do you ever think we've lived too long for the past?" She tilted her head. "Without the past, you wouldn't be you and I wouldn't be me." He smiled, gaze distant. "I used to think my life was defined by guilt. But maybe it's forgiveness yours that finally taught me how to forgive myself." Her voice was soft as wind. "Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's accepting that the worst thing that ever happened can still give birth to something beautiful. He reached out, took her hand gently, and that beautiful thing is you. July came. The vineyards were heavy with ripe fruit. The air smelled of sun soil and leaves. Isabella sat on the steps writing the final pages of her new book, light in the place without a name. Henry walked up carrying 2 glasses of red wine. Finished yet almost. Just the ending left. The ending, huh? He smiled. I hope the heroine doesn't die. She smirked. No. She lives, and the man in the story makes her coffee for the rest of her life. Henry clinked his glass against hers. Then I suppose I've been turned into a fictional character. Maybe she teased. But at least this time it's a story with a happy ending. They fell silent. Above them, the sky was so blue it looked like it might melt. Henry leaned over and kissed her forehead. She closed her eyes, breathing in the mingled scent of wood and wine. In that moment, Isabella understood. There is no greater redemption than being with the one who once made you believe that love is still worth something. Late that night, moonlight spread across the vineyards like a sheet of silver. Henry sat at the wooden desk, writing something while she reclined nearby, listening to the soft scratch of his pen. When he finished, he folded the paper carefully and placed it on the table. Who's that for? She asked. He smiled. For myself 12 years ago. So he'll know that someday he'll finally be at peace. Isabella touched the paper gently. The final line read, I no longer run because I've been found not by the world, but by the one who saw the best in me, even when I no longer believed it existed. She folded the letter and placed it beside the candle. Then you've lived enough for 2 lifetimes, Henry, she whispered. He laughed softly, took her hand, his eyes glimmering with a peace he had searched for all his life. Outside, the wind carried in the scent of ripened grapes. Crickets sang. Somewhere far away, an old melody drifted through the night. For the first time, there was no more darkness between them. Only one thing remained, the quiet of 2 hearts that had wandered half a lifetime and finally found where they belonged. On the last morning of September, soft sunlight spilled over the Tuscan Valley like warm honey. There was nothing remarkable about the day, just a quiet, ordinary morning. And perhaps that ordinariness was exactly what Isabella had prayed for all her life. Henry was in the kitchen making coffee, the sound of water running, the gentle clink of a spoon against porcelain. The scent of coffee filled the house, mingling with the smell of wood and ripe grapes drifting in through the window. She walked in wrapped in a thin robe, hair loose on her shoulders, eyes still heavy with sleep. You're up early, she murmured, her voice husky, warm as morning mist. Henry turned a quiet smile on his lips. Couldn't sleep. I wanted to write something before I forget how to say what's true. She leaned against the doorframe, half teasing, half tender. I thought you said love doesn't need words, only staying. It's true, he nodded, pouring the coffee. But some things, if left unsaid, people might never know they were real. He handed her the cup, and the morning light caught their hands, the steam rising like a whisper between them. Isabella looked at him for a long moment. Henry, are you hiding something from me? Henry stayed silent for a while. Then he spoke, voice calm. Too calm, and it made her heart tighten. I have a tumor. The doctor says it's not serious. If I start treatment soon. She set the cup down, her chest hollowing out. Not serious, she repeated, trembling. You say it like it's happening to someone else. Henry smiled, stepped closer, and touched her cheek. You know, Isabella, I survived the last 12 years, not because of medicine, but because of one person. Now, if God gives me more time, I don't want to spend it fighting. I want to spend it living. Tears welled in her eyes, though she fought to stay composed. You can't give up, not now, not when we've finally found peace. You once told me to face fear to live, even if it's only for one more day. Henry shook his head gently, his tone low but serene. But I have lived, Isabella. Every morning I woke up beside you, I won. She held him close. Not the embrace of someone desperate to hold on, but of someone who no longer feared letting go. Outside, the wind swept through the vineyards, the rustle of leaves sounding like time whispering past. The weeks that followed, Henry grew weaker. But he kept to his rituals, morning coffee afternoons, fixing the neighbors' bicycles' evening walks through lavender paths, with her hand in his. Sometimes he still joked, "If I go first, promise me you'll make the coffee with your left hand. That's how I used to spill half of it just to make you laugh." Isabella smiled, though deep down she knew each joke was slowly turning into an unwritten farewell. One rainy night she woke and found his side of the bed empty. She ran outside. Henry stood under the olive tree, drenched, a half-written page trembling in his hand. "What are you doing out here?" she cried, gripping his hand. He looked at her eyes, catching the flicker of a distant lantern. Finishing the ending. The ending of what Henry smiled soft as the wind after rain. Our story. The next morning when the sun rose, Henry was lying on the wooden chair by the porch. Eyes closed, his face peaceful, as if merely asleep. The page in his hand still smelled of fresh ink. On it were only 3 lines. "If one morning you wake and I am no longer there, know that I didn't leave, I just went ahead to make the coffee. I promise its scent will always find its way back to you." Isabella sat beside him for a long time. She didn't cry, because in that stillness, she understood love never dies. It simply changes form, quiet, eternal, powerful enough to outlast the body that carried it. 3 years later. Tuscany was unchanged, the sun, the wind, the heavy clusters of purple grapes. Their little house was now the Reed Sullivan Foundation, a home for orphaned children to learn and rebuild their lives. Standing in the garden, watching them laugh and run, Isabella felt peace, because Henry still lived here in every breath of the land, in every child's laughter. Every morning, she still made 2 cups of coffee, one for her, one for him. The steam rose thin and soft, meeting the sunlight, then vanished. But the scent stayed, just as Henry had never truly left her life. One late autumn afternoon, as she taught a little girl to write, she asked, "Do you know what love is?" The girl answered without hesitation, innocent and sure. "It's when someone leaves, but you still feel them in your heart, right?" Isabella paused, then smiled, brushing the child's hair. "Yes, exactly. And if you truly love someone, no matter how much the world changes, you'll still hear them somewhere in the smallest things." The girl tilted her head. Like the smell of morning coffee, Isabella nodded, eyes glistening. "Precisely." That night she sat on the porch beneath the silver moonlight. On the table, a cup of coffee steamed quietly. The breeze stirred the old paper Henry had written, making it flutter. She picked it up, read it for the 1,000th time, and it still felt new. "I can't promise to walk beside you all my life, but I promise wherever you are, that will be home." Isabella looked up at the sky. A shooting star streaked across, leaving a faint silver trail. She whispered, not sure if it was to herself or to the man who had become the light above her. "I'm home now, Henry." This story is not just the journey of 2 souls finding each other in the dark. They are the journey of faith itself, that true love doesn't come to possess, but to set free. Because when you love the right person, even a wounded world becomes worth living in. If the story of Henry and Isabella has touched something in your heart, take a moment today to look at the person you love and tell them you're grateful they're here. Sometimes a cup of morning coffee, a simple touch of the hand, is all it takes for your heart to know you've already found home.